This week in the Toadstool Boardroom, we're doing a Metroid series retrospective. We're talking about the entire series all the way from Metroid on NES all the way up to Metroid Prime 4 Beyond. Boardroom on! Hello and welcome to episode 122 of the Toadstool Boardroom for the week of February 5th, 2025. My name's Logan Plant, and maybe we're actually the Toadstool Federation this week, and we're in full force as I'm joined, as always, by Justin Korais.
You know, I've often been mistaken for a Chozo, so I think this is perfect.
Oh, really?
All the time.
That's surprising. Are you often, crouched in the corner, desperately clinging on to something until somebody shoots you?
Yeah, it's just my day job.
Oh, wow. Okay, that doesn't sound good. And Chris Shriver's here. Hey, Chris.
Go Birds.
Go. Yeah, it's Super Bowl week.
Wait.
Or, sorry, the big game. We're going to get sued because I said
Oh,
those
man,
two
you
words
said
together.
it. The whole
Wait,
someone's
it's
phone
over.
just caught
Birds-
fire.
Birds as in Eagles or birds as in Chozo?
That's true. It's
That
a
is
very
true. Take that as
bird-heavy
you will.
episode.
Uh-huh.
So is Samus part Chozo? I love Metroid. Some of the lore goes over my head. I'll be
Some
honest.
of the,
It's
I think some of the lore goes over Nintendo's head.
I think
being
so
honest.
too. I absolutely think so too. Yeah, I played Other M a little bit this week in preparation for this episode, and I can definitely tell you that I got a little bit out of hand at times. So yeah, it's the Metroid episode. We're gonna travel to that Nintendo galaxy far, far away, not Star Wars, but Metroid, and talk about the entire series in just a little bit. I'm really excited to have that conversation on kind of a slower week. But before we get into that, it's our favorite time of the quarter. Nintendo financials are in. So we're going to talk about Nintendo's Q4 2024 results. But this morning, we got played a little bit. Last week, Justin and I did a February Nintendo Direct predictions show. And then this morning, Nintendo tweets, tune in on, and I said, oh, it's happening. And then it said April 2nd, 2025 for the Switch 2 Direct. So they technically announced a Direct this week. It was one we already knew about, but we have a time for it now. Bright and early, April 2nd, 6 a.m. Pacific time. Set your alarmos, and we'll see you there. So yeah, I'm very excited about that show. Interestingly, I noticed they didn't say how long it was going to be. Usually they say for 40 minutes on Nintendo Switch or Nintendo Switch 2, but they didn't. I think this is going to be a longer one, probably upwards of an hour. Justin, what do you think?
That's exactly what I was thinking. I think we're probably looking at a solid hour, give or take a minute or two. I just love that they came out and said there will be no mention of anything other than the successor to the Nintendo Switch.
That's it. That's all we'll be talking about. No mention of the Nintendo Switch successor in this presentation.
Uh-huh.
Chris, lock in your time right now. How long is this thing going to be?
No more than an hour and a half, but honestly, I don't think they even know how long it's going to be. That's probably why they didn't tell us.
Mhm.
Yeah, if they're still working on it, or I'm really interested to see what this one looks like, because for Switch 1, they did it live in Japan on stage. It was their big return to the stage with a live audience for the first time in years since they pioneered the direct/digital event format for E3, totally changed the game. They go back on stage to show off the Switch, so I'm curious to see what it looks like this time around. But let's hit the Nintendo financials, because they're in for the fourth quarter of 2024. Switch has passed 150 million units sold. It's only the third console ever to do so, alongside the Nintendo DS and the PlayStation 2. So yeah, just huge numbers there. Remember a few months ago, Sony went and updated their PS2 numbers to say, oh, actually, we sold 160 million of these, so we're still number one. I think Switch is still going to get to 160 in its lifetime. Am I alone?
No, I think they'll get there easily, especially if they do a price drop, if they do special bundles, things like that. If they continue to sell them at a lower price point after the Switch 2 comes out, especially with back compat, that makes sense. And realistically, the reason that the PlayStation 2 got as far as it did is because they kept selling it for years, and many years in South American markets and things like that. So it's a global number. They'll keep chipping away at it. Frankly, I don't think it's gonna take them that long to get there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't remember the exact numbers. I don't have them on hand, but basically the Switch reached 150 million sold months and months faster than the PS2 did. So it's actually selling at a faster rate in its lifetime to this point than the PlayStation 2, which yeah, it did. There were still PlayStation 2 games on Best Buy store shelves in 2018. It was unreal how often. It was like Just Dance on Wii. There was still FIFA on PS2 sitting on store shelves because that's all some people still had. So it'll get there eventually. Chris, you agree?
Yeah, I think they have to drop the price of this thing in the next 18 months, I'll say. If they, I mean, I don't think anything will happen if they don't. I just don't think they'll sell as many units as they would otherwise. Especially like if the Switch 2 is, if we're assuming it's going to be $400, like, and you're keeping the base model that's 7 years, 8 years old now at $300 at Christmas time, it's like, come on, guys, what are we doing? Like,
Yeah. And then we've talked about this on the show before, but there's a chance that they release a new version of the Switch 1 in a couple of years, like the new Nintendo 2DS XL or the Game Boy Micro or the Wii Mini. They've done this before for their very successful consoles. They've come out and put something else out years after the fact, after the successor is launched, to just keep selling a very cheap, kind of stripped down version of whatever came before. I think they could do that again. I don't know what that looks like, because to me that kind of is what the Switch Lite already is. I don't think they sell like just a set-top box that's the Switch without a handheld. I don't see them doing that, so I'm not sure what maybe a Switch Mini, but
Switch
some
Ultra
games
Lite
are already too small on Switch Lite.
Yeah, like how much smaller are you going to make the Lite? Like that's the thing I have a
Switch
hard
Micro,
time with.
let's go.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Throw it on your keys. No, I mean I do think the next best thing they can do is throw an OLED display in it.
Yeah.
And it's like it's the easy cop out, but like and it's why I don't work for Nintendo, but I really don't know what else you do with this thing.
Yeah, some kind of Switch Lite Deluxe model.
Well, and like just the layout alone, like there's just not that much surface area left without like shrinking the buttons down. Like the buttons in the Switch Lite are the same size as the one on the base model Switch, other than the D-pad, which like is an actual D-pad on the Lite. Like, without making some pretty dramatic changes, like they're kind of stuck.
Do we think we'll get a Prime 4 special edition?
Ooh, yeah, I think so. I think I don't know. I could see it going either way. They did it for Samus Returns. And it was that new 3DS XL that they tried.
But 3DS they had like a million.
They did
SKUs of, like they got to be really confident in what Metroid's going to sell, and I don't think it's going to do Splatoon and Pokemon numbers. Like those are the games that typically, and Fire Emblem, like those are the games that typically get like those treatments on Switch, right?
Did Fire Emblem get one that I'm just totally not thinking?
No,
about?
I might be thinking of 3DS, honestly.
Yeah,
I think I am.
Yeah, Pokemon and Splatoon, and then Echoes of Wisdom got the gold one alongside it, which apparently sold really, really well, is what I've heard. That thing, the gold Switch Lite Hyrule Edition, did really well for them last holiday season. So
I think that's what you're going to see is just like a bunch of different colors and stuff, like of the light. Just keep riding that train.
Yeah, it's also worth pointing out, because I just fact-checked it to make sure I had it right. The PS2 came out in 2000. The last ones were manufactured as late as 2013, like a full 13 years later. And so, like, even if they just, like, keep releasing inexpensive holiday ones for a couple of years, like, I don't see any reason they couldn't cross that barrier easily.
Yeah. So they stopped making PS2s the year the PS4 came out.
Exactly right.
Yep, they made it a full 2 generations.
Well, but here's what's weird about that situation is like you have a console that like there were millions of them sold. The next generation of it comes out, it is backwards compatible, and then it isn't. And Sony has a track record of dropping the price of their first party games like relatively quickly. Nintendo is the opposite of that. So like buying a PS2 in 2010 is more attractive than buying a Switch Lite in 2025. Just because of like if I have a limited budget, like there's only so many games I'm going to be able to buy on a Switch that are first party because Nintendo just doesn't drop the price of them.
Yeah, I think my counterpoint.
Do you guys know?
So I think my counterpoint though is that when your thumbsticks stop working on your PS2, you bought a new controller. When they stop working on your Switch Lite, you buy a new Switch Lite.
That is fair.
Do you guys know what the best-selling Nintendo game of the year was in 2024?
Is it on this document that you gave us?
I won't confirm or deny if it's on the show notes that you're looking at. Any guesses of what it was?
Mario Party?
I would guess Animal Crossing.
Super Mario Party Jamboree was the second best-selling Nintendo game of last year. It shipped over 6 million units in its first 2.5 months. It's the biggest debut in series history. Awesome stuff.
It's
Mario Kart 8 Deluxe.
Yeah, it's Mario Kart.
Best-selling Nintendo game of last year. It's just at a full $60. It
It
just
is.
doesn't matter. It's crazy. Mario Odyssey sold like 500,000
Well,
units last quarter. It's just unbelievable. This stuff keeps
They're
moving.
not even trying
but
to
they
sell
include
it.
but they include the bundles, right? Like I would
Yeah,
love to
yeah.
know
Mhm.
how many of the console sales of last year were that Black Friday bundle.
Yeah. It's
Plenty, I'm
actually
sure.
not. It's
But
interesting because the OLED accounts for most of the Switch sales these
Yeah.
days. It's over 50%. But
Right.
last Black Friday was the first Black Friday they made a Mario Kart 8 OLED bundle. Previously, it was only the Switch. And they
Right.
don't, in their financials, they don't break out the numbers that finely for us as much as we'd like them to. But
and
yeah,
honestly,
Mario Kart just keeps selling.
it's worth pointing out that every time we look at these quarterly financials, we're like, oh my god, so many Mario Kart sold, and only one of those encompasses Black Friday.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. I'd just like to say also
Juggernaut.
on the subject of Mario Kart, people that think Mario Kart 9 is going to be cross-gen, that's just crazy to me. Why would they ever do that?
Yeah.
Seriously, Mario
Yeah.
Kart is going to sell Switch 2s for the next decade, just as Mario Kart 8 has sold Switch 1s for the last decade. They'd be nuts to put that on Switch 1. I think that's just crazy that there's people out there thinking that.
You think the Switch one can render that Donkey Kong Ultra Fuzz? Get out of here.
I don't think so. I think that's why they redesigned him. The Switch 1 couldn't handle it. Yeah, he looks too good.
Mhm.
Other numbers I wanted to throw out: Luigi's Mansion 2 HD only sold 1.8 million since its launch in June,
Good.
which was low in my opinion. Not that I'm like disappointed. I was just surprised because Luigi's Mansion 3 sold nearly 15 million copies when it came out since 2019 when it launched, and then this one does almost 10% of that in its debut year. Chris, you said good. What do you think's behind this?
Vote with your wallet. Don't pay
Yeah,
$60
Mhm.
for these 3DS ports or these ports that are being shoehorned through the pipeline. Like, just don't do it. And it seems like that is the message that people got. That game, like, I think even if I were a standard consumer, I think even looking at Luigi's Mansion 3 is arguably the best looking game on the Switch. Period.
It's pretty gorgeous.
One of, for
It's
sure. Mhm.
it's like it's top 2 probably. But to go from that to 2, if I'm somebody that like only cares about graphics, I'm looking at 2 and I'm like, what? Why would I play this? Like, it's not
Mhm.
an attractive looking game at all. And unless you know the backstory of like, well, it was on the 3DS and they actually looks better than it did there, like, you're just gonna look at that and be like, this seems like a lesser product.
Yeah, I think the
Not-
number even hurts it too. You have people that have Luigi's Mansion 3. Why would I want 2 that looks worse? And it's not going to
Right.
be as good as this one I already bought. And we do see a trend, which is why it's interesting and really great to see that Mario Party just had the biggest launch in series history, despite being the third Mario Party game on Switch. Because we do see trends that, with exceptions like Pokemon, Scarlet and Violet are going to pass some of the other Pokemon games that are on Switch. But the second iteration of something sells worse than the first on Switch. New Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe is still millions and millions ahead of Wonder, which is by all accounts a significantly better game. And it's just I have a 2D Mario. I have a Super Mario Brothers game. My kid doesn't need another one, right? That's the thought I think for buying another one. So I expected Luigi's Mansion 2 to be higher than this though. 1.8 million is really really low when something like Paper Mario did 2 million. It outsold this so far.
I don't know that that's
Surprisingly me.
entirely Wonder's fault. I mean, New Super Mario Brothers U has been on there for forever.
But what's not Wonder's fault that it hasn't sold as well?
Yeah, I mean, and it's like it's considering how long Wonder's been out compared to U, like it's
Yeah.
only 3 million shy. It's pretty close.
Yeah, that it's not the only case though. Super Mario Party is millions ahead of Superstars, which is also a much better game. And it's the first one that came out is millions and millions and millions ahead, even though it's had a few extra years, but Superstars isn't going to catch it.
No, but like you all like also think about it was the first Mario Party on the console, and like the bank of Switch games that you now have to choose from. If I'm buying a Switch day one, I'm not buying 30 games on day one. I'm buying like 2.
Yeah.
You know,
Mhm.
it's like you've got to be really, and unfortunately, it's a tough decision to make. We have the luxury where we've played all these things as they've come out. If I'm somebody
Yeah.
just getting in, it's like, where do I start? Like,
Yeah.
there's a lot of good stuff here.
You start with Mario Kart, Breath of the Wild, Mario Odyssey, which all were there year one. And
Right.
the numbers show that's still what people are starting with. That's still what people are choosing to buy. And whatever Pokemon flavor you want. But
Yeah.
yeah. No, I think that, I don't know, you sounded like you were disagreeing with me, but I think we're making the same point that just the first
Probably.
one on the console is going to sell more. It just is.
Yeah.
And I just didn't expect Luigi's Mansion 2 to have this bad of a start. It's not, it's still almost 2 million. That's great numbers for probably one of the cheapest games they've developed on the console, but it just didn't sell as much as I thought it was going to.
How much of it do you think is people just like being checked out of the Switch at this point?
Yeah. I think that's part of it too. Software across the board is down.
Yeah.
It's just people are ready for the next thing.
Yeah.
And it came out at a weird time. It came out in the summer. People don't typically buy as many games in the summer as they do in the winter or the fall. And it's a $60 3DS port of an inferior sequel. And it seems like people are paying attention. So
I think if you dropped it for $30 in October, double this number. Easy.
Gangbusters.
Yeah.
But then they wouldn't make the same
I
number of
honestly
dollars.
believe that.
I do too. 100%.
Half the price, double the sales. That's the same revenue. So I guess they don't care.
Yeah.
But I agree with you. Yeah. No, I'm interested to see what Donkey Kong does now because it's the same deal. It's a port of a game that's already come out before. There's a superior sequel on the console that's been on the console for years. We'll see how this one does at a time where people are just ready for the next thing. I mean, Donkey Kong came out the same day we got the Switch 2 trailer. They didn't set it up that well, so we'll see in 3 months. And then the last note I have here is that Switch Sports hit 15.7 million, and that's just your boardroom update. Because Odell never settled up from our bet on that one.
He still owes you a
multiple years
steak,
ago.
right? Wasn't that
He
the
does.
bet?
He owes me a
Yeah.
steak dinner. Yeah. Yeah, he does.
Coming for you, Odell.
Yeah. If you're a newer listener, our old co-host Odell, who now works at PlayStation,
Chairman
we
Emeritus.
made a bet on the boardroom years ago that he said that Switch Sports was going to sell poorly. I said it would sell more than 10 million. We made a stake bet on the show, and he never settled up. Even though I've seen him in person since then. He hasn't settled up yet. So I got beef with Odell, and I need a beef dinner. From
I
Odell.
thought the problem was you're missing the beef.
Yeah, exactly. Where's the beef, Odell? Okay, we got a question from Tim about these financials, who says, in relation to the financial/sales numbers releasing this week, Merry Christmas, Logan. Thank you, Tim. There are 72 first-party titles on the platform that broke 1 million sales. Insane, by the way. That is the most of any console of all time. Switch has more 1 million first-party published titles than any other console ever. It's not surprising. That's a huge number. I'm sure we'll be seeing many top Switch games ever lists down the road that will feature many deserved yet predictable titles that sold insanely well, but I'm curious about what sort of top 10 lists you would make for games that sold fewer than 4 million. The gold outshone by diamonds, if you will, that deserve a spotlight. Chris, you were putting together a list before the show. Do you have one to share?
Not a full list because
That's fine.
honestly, of the titles that are in here, there are a lot of games that like really didn't resonate with me, and I wouldn't put them on my list. But I can give you what I have so far. There's also stuff I haven't played. Like Kirby's Return to Dreamland Deluxe is one that like has just been sitting on the shelf since I bought it, and I know that tears Logan apart, but I haven't played it.
It's a great game.
What I do have on here though, Pikmin 4, of course I'm going to put that at 1. Metroid Dread, Paper Mario: The Origami King, Captain Toad Treasure Tracker, Metroid Prime Remastered, Luigi's Mansion 2 HD, ARMS, and new Pokemon Snap.
5 minutes ago, he's like, good, vote with your wallet. It sold like crap. It's on my list of my favorite games. That sold
I never said I didn't like Luigi's Mansion 2.
Yeah, I know.
I'm not a fan
I
of
know.
these lazy ports, but they're getting my money either way.
Yeah, that's true. Because he's also
Do as
playing
I say,
Donkey Kong
not as I
still.
do.
Yeah, exactly. I know, it's interesting because I look at the games that have sold fewer than 4 million, which is this benchmark the question set for us, and there's amazing games in here that to me are better than any Pokemon game on Switch that have sold 15, 20 million. So my list from 10 to 1 is new Pokemon Snap, 2.4 million, Origami King, 3.5 million, Kirby's Return to Dreamland Deluxe, 1.8 million. Fantastic Kirby game. Chris, you should play that with James when he gets older. That should be like co-op. Family co-op platformer. That's such a good like first platformer.
I'll wait to play
Metroid
it.
Prime Remastered. Yeah, it's oh man, it's great. And that's such a good version of it. Metroid Prime Remastered, 1.4 million. What are we doing? That game was $40. It was a gorgeous remaster. It was $40 and people didn't show up. Devastating. Xenoblade Chronicles 3, 1.9 million. Pikmin 4, 3.5 million. Age of Calamity, 3.1 million. Metroid Dread, 3.1 million. The Thousand Year Door, 2.1. And Captain Toad Treasure Tracker, 2.4. Awesome games. This is a better lineup than like some consoles ever even have. Yeah, it's cool. Thanks for that question. That was fun to look at. So yeah, go find the image, the very blurry image of the 72 games that have sold over 1 million copies on Switch, and
Honestly,
make a list
I
of
think the
your
best
own.
game on your list, you had it high, to me, is Age of Calamity. God, that game is so good.
It's so good.
So
It's
good.
great.
Yeah.
We
Also,
don't need
like
to let Chris talk about the frame rate.
Shadow says Xenoblade Chronicles 2,
Performance is
and
garbage.
which also I don't think cracked that number, and I
No,
don't
it
know what
didn't.
Super Mario RPG finished at. I think it was around 4,
It's like
but maybe
3.
just under it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
it didn't make it there.
There's some bangers.
So that's our abridged financials discussion. I'm going in on more stuff on Nintendo Voice Chat this week, so go check that out if you want to hear me talk about
Shameless
Mario RPG sales numbers, because I don't know if it worked. I don't know if this experiment of releasing 3 in 1 year worked, and we're going to talk about that over there. But right now, we are going to talk about Metroid. It's our Metroid retrospective. I've been super into Metroid, I don't know, the last year or so, and just really diving in a lot over the last couple of months. And we're looking forward to Metroid Prime 4 Beyond. We're hoping to see more of it in the next couple of months. It's coming out this year, so we decided we would take this kind of slower week to do a Metroid retrospective and just go through the whole series, some more brief than others for what we've played, what we haven't played, and just talk about this series that has had an interesting and kind of tumultuous history when you take a look at it. There are multiple near decade long gaps in between certain entries. Between 1994 and 2002, 0 Metroid games. Between 2000 and 2016, 2010 and 2016, 0 Metroid games. And the 2 that bookend that drought are probably the 2 most hated games in the series. But then you have pockets in between, like 2002 to 2010, where you had 9 Metroid games released in those 9 years. It's just, they go in waves with this thing where they really try to build it up, make it big. Sometimes it doesn't work. They take a step back. And right now, we're in another one of those Renaissance periods with Samus Returns in 2017, Dread in 21, Prime Remastered in 23, and now Prime 4 this year. We're in one of those up waves where they're really trying again with Metroid. And looking at the sales numbers isn't too exciting when you see that Prime Remastered barely cracked 1 million. So hopefully this is a run of sustained success for Metroid that can kind of ramp up. But let's start at the beginning with Metroid, which came out in 1987 on the NES. And in Japan, it was a little bit different story. It came out in 1986, and it was part of the Famicom Disk System over there, which never came out in the States. And this was a different form of media that you attached to your Famicom, to your NES, and it could save, which you couldn't do in the NES version, where you had to write down a multi-character password that was super obnoxious to keep track of, and it was very impossible to save that game and get back to where you were going. So, Justin, you want to kick it off and talk about the original Metroid?
Oh yeah, man! I played this a ton on the NES. It was honestly iconic from the get go. Like I feel like everybody had the game, or everybody had a cousin who had the game and played it. It was like a weird, spooky, eerie time. Dense, confusing, especially for my little 6-year-old brain. But just cool as all get out. The abilities were really neat. It felt like the biggest game on the planet too, which is why you needed the password system, because so many other games at that time was about you learning how to survive to get from the beginning to the end in, I don't know, 90 minutes or so if you figure out how to do it. And that's not how Metroid works. So it was like going from like a comic book to a novel in terms of video games. And like it's an early game where the music stuck out as not just like the background tunes, but like really, really good music. I loved it. I hated the passwords. I hated having to like keep track of them and lose them, and you would write them down, and you would write one down wrong, and so now you've like lost all your progress, or you can't read your handwriting, or you lose your little slip of paper where you're keeping track of it. But yeah, like this is what started it all, and it ruled.
Did you ever finish it? Did you ever beat the original Metroid?
Oh, not on the NES. No, I never beat that until it came to like later versions and things where you had like save states and things like that. It was hard as heck too, especially late game, like punishingly so. But like especially then with a game like that, it was never really about that. It was about the exploration in this creepy, strange world and environment, and how it made you feel. It was not about reaching the credits.
Yeah, it's sometimes crazy just thinking about Metroid being on the original NES and just some of the stuff it was alongside, and just how much it was punching above its weight for what it was doing on that hardware compared to something like Donkey Kong, which had 3 levels and the fourth one was cut from the NES version because they couldn't fit it on the cartridge. But then you have Metroid on the same system.
Hmm.
It's crazy that they squeezed this thing down to just be on the NES in America, which didn't have the Famicom disk system, and that it is this labyrinth that it is. I've never played that much of it because it has a remake that, in my opinion, kind of renders it obsolete, which we'll talk about in a little bit. I think Zero Mission is one of the best remakes of all time, but it's still really, really cool to just boot up and play. And I really liked the Metroid challenges in Nintendo World Championships last year, and just kind of accessing that game that way and fighting Ridley and fighting Kraid, who is as tall as Samus
Yeah,
in the
little
NES
Kraid,
one.
yeah.
And then by the time we get to Dread, he's this towering skyscraper. It's super
Or
funny
in
to just
Super.
look at these.
Can I
Yeah,
yeah,
can
he's
I
huge
can
in
I
that
tell
one
you
too.
what is like always my enduring memory of that game though?
Yeah.
So like just like in the later Metroid games, you get the little like health upgrades, right? Each one basically is an entire another health bar. And obviously you want to collect these things so you can live for longer. But if you had to stop playing, you had to die so that you could get your password. And I have just these vivid memories of being like late-ish in the game where you have a ton of health upgrades and you gotta go, and it's such a pain in the butt to die. I remember there's like quicksand
So
that
funny.
does like drains your health over time, and jumping that and just sitting there for like 5 minutes, just waiting for the health bar to go down, just so I could get my password, so that if somebody kicked the console or I turned it off, I could get my progress back. Because otherwise, I'm hosed.
Yeah, yeah, such a
No
crazy
save
system.
station.
When Zelda could save on the same system, you could save The Legend of Zelda, but not Metroid. Yeah,
Power
and
the
they
gold
came out
cartridges.
around the same time. Yeah. Chris, any memories with the original Metroid?
Um, Nothing beyond kind of what Justin has touched on. Really, that remake is the one that I tend to go back to. I try to go back to NES like every
Mhm.
couple of years, and then I start playing it. I'm like, why am I doing this? And then I turn it off. I will give a shout out though to NSO. Does a really good job at like if you are curious about any of the like the Wrigley boss battle at the end of the game or anything like that. You can actually get to like snapshots of like big moments in Metroid in those like special launchers that they have in NSO.
Mhm.
So if you're curious to just like play it yourself and not play the entire game, that's a good way to just like see how it is, and see how hard it is. To Justin's point, um,
You can also
it.
check it out
It's very
in
hard.
NES Remix
Mhm.
too.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
But I mean, it definitely it laid a great foundation, but they had a lot to learn, you
Yes,
know,
they did.
in the years to come.
And I even just love the first opening minutes of Metroid, which are iconic. Super Metroid revisits it and
Mhm.
does a play on it when you return to the same planet, and then Zero Mission, of course, does the same thing. But you walk right, and then you don't have the morph ball that you need, so you walk left, and it's the game telling you that early. This is a platformer where you can walk left. You can't do
Yeah,
that like any other
You
game, and it's just
literally can't in
yeah.
Mario.
Yeah, you can't. The screen stops. It scrolls and it doesn't scroll backwards in Mario 1. And yeah, it's super cool. And yeah, a really ambitious game at the time. Awesome atmosphere and vibes that the series remained known for. 4 years later in the States, we got Metroid 2 Return of Samus, and this is a Game Boy title. And yeah, this one's very different. It's about exterminating all the Metroids after the events of Metroid 1. And on the Game Boy, there's a counter on the bottom of your screen that tells you how many Metroids are remaining. And this game's just, it's confusing, I think, to play these days. You're just going deeper and deeper and deeper down this rabbit hole on this planet SR388 where the Metroids live, and you come across a Metroid, you kill it, that number goes down by 1. Samus's sprite is huge. She takes up like a quarter of the screen just on the Game Boy because it's just all that's there for that real estate. You have to be able to see your character. So yeah, this is another one that has a remake on 3DS that isn't quite as definitive as Zero Mission is, I think, in retelling Metroid 2. I think it makes some stumbles in some places we'll get to, but
Some people forget it
Metroid
exists
2 is
entirely.
yes, yeah, last week Justin forgot that it existed. But Metroid 2 is a really cool game and a really ambitious Game Boy title. Chris, I'll let you kick it off on this one.
this was actually the first Metroid game that I played. My aunt had this on a Game Boy, and I would play it every weekend when I would go to her house when I was a kid. Like I remember this and Dr. Mario. Um, And yeah, I just remember it being insanely hard, not really knowing what I was doing, being like a dumb young kid playing it. But I remember thinking, like just the character itself was cool on like the label of the sticker. That was really all I had to go off of at the time. The label of the cartridge.
Uh-huh.
And little by little, I started to learn. Well, I think once Smash came out, that was when like I really, started to pick up on who Samus was. But yeah, beyond that, I mean, I just remember it being super confusing. I will give a shout out because I have to because I'm extra. AM2R, also known as another Metroid 2 remake, is a very good fan remake of Metroid 2. If you're going to play it, I highly recommend that's the one that you play. I'm personally not a fan of Samus Returns, but we'll get to that later.
I'm not really either. And
Yeah.
maybe we need to talk after the show about something you just said. I would love to play a certain version of Metroid 2. Yeah. Because I've never finished either version of Metroid 2. I got really close on Samus Returns, but just the Metroid boss fights are just so repetitive and it just goes on and there's too much parrying in that game. Yeah, it was a stepping stone to get to Dread, which we'll get to again. But I want to bring up kind of a connection here. Just you can't really talk about the origins of Metroid without talking about Alien, the film series, which
I was going to
Metroid
bring this up.
takes.
Yeah.
Go for it. Take it away.
No. I mean, it takes a ton of inspiration from the Alien franchise. I'm pretty sure the was it Gunpei Yokoi? He wasn't involved in Metroid,
Yes.
was he?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Like basically saw that movie and then I think like met with Ridley Scott. I could be totally making that up. And like
I don't know if that part's true. I've never heard that before. That's
I don't know. I
interesting.
thought I saw that in a YouTube video. I might be making that up though. But yeah, they like just really inspired a lot of what that entire franchise went on to do. I'm sure you have more to speak to it.
Yeah, like Alien 1 is Metroid 1. It's just very isolating and quiet, and the game is called Metroid, and you don't see a Metroid until the final act of the game, until the very, very end, and they're terrifying when they finally show up, and they just feel very imposing and threatening, and they just glue onto Samus, and it's very scary. You got a morph ball power bomb, then freeze him to kill him, and that's like very complicated to kill these things by the time they finally show up, and then Ridley Scott, you take whichever one you think Ridley and Metroid is named after. I'm not sure, but that's there. It's a female heroine, which was unique at the time, especially in video games, right? That Samus is a girl. That's the big reveal. If you beat Metroid fast enough, you discover that that Samus is a girl, and you don't know that. I think even the instruction manual in the States says that you're
a boy android,
like it refers to Samus with male pronouns.
Yep.
Yeah, which is fascinating. It's just a prize for beating it fast enough, like Justin was talking about earlier. So, and then Metroid 2 is Aliens, because Aliens has many more xenomorphs that the characters are just carving through the entire movie, and then Samus in Metroid 2, it's about exterminating the Metroids and killing 40 of them across this adventure. So you can see the parallels for this.
I don't know. The planet LV-426 is so different from planet SR-388. I mean...
yeah, completely different. Yeah, no inspiration there whatsoever. So those are the first two Metroid games. Justin, do you have anything on Metroid 2, or should we move on?
Only thing I'll add is some people dislike it, but it's like really limited in things like UI information, and some of that's limitations of the Game Boy. Like, I don't think you have a map in that game at all. Adds cool things like the spider ball and some stuff that's iconic, and it is like in terms of the overarching Metroid story, exceptionally important in the actual Metroid lore. So even if you don't play it, and honestly probably don't. Like read a wiki about it or something. It does some cool stuff.
Yeah, it's another one that's fun to just kind of revisit and pop in, but not one I would sit down.
At worst, watch a Let's Play.
Thing.
Yeah.
But then 3 years later on Super Nintendo, we got what is still widely considered one of the best Metroid games, which is Super Metroid on the Super Nintendo. And yeah, I mean, we've talked about this game a lot lately after my recent playthrough of it, but just what a game. Just what it takes everything the first two did. And I feel like this is the one where the Metroid formula was truly established for what games are still doing 30 years later. There's still games that just are Super Metroid with their own twist. Hollow Knight, Prince of Persia, Metroid Dread, right? All these games are Super Metroid just with their own spin on them, and it's just amazing how well that game still holds up. And we talked about it. It takes you first on kind of a reunion tour of everything that you do in Metroid 1. You go through the exact same rooms. You see where Mother Brain died at the end of Metroid 1, and you go through that room that's just all blown up, and then you go deeper and deeper into the planet, and it's so much larger than it was in Metroid 1. Justin, talk about Super Metroid.
I adore this game. I can't speak highly enough about it. I love that when you go through the Metroid 1 areas, like they're broken down, they're kind of overgrown, they're rusty, they're really dark, and then you go down the lift, you get the spider, you get the morph ball, you get scanned by that little eyeball thing, and then like the planet wakes up and changes, and like spoilers, I guess, for Super Metroid. But like
we're spoiling it all. I guess we should have said that. Yeah, we can talk about whatever we want here.
All right, Metroid's a girl. Just kidding.
Can't crawl.
No, can't crawl.
Metroid can't crawl.
Yeah. Why can't Metroid crawl? But and so like the world, and to me, like that is other than the fact that it's 16-bit and gorgeous, and frankly, it's a perfect video game. The biggest advancement to me is just the way the world is so responsive to you as a character, right? Shattering the glass tube. When you get the ability, like movement abilities that let you like carve through entire sections of levels and find new interesting things, and like it's not just about opening different colored doors. You like are able to destroy different objects in different ways, and really if you play this game front to back, you develop a mastery over the planet that is really, really cool, and extremely I think underappreciated. And then it also does a really, really good job of it. Like you go through all these different environments, right? You have like the lava area, the plant level, you have the ghost ship area, you're underwater in this area. It's like a lot of really diverse and cool spaces to go through. And this is the first game I ever played, and frankly the earliest game that I can think of that does my absolute favorite thing for a big video game to do, which is to make the most difficult part of like the final boss run or whatever be the second to last thing. We talked about this before, and like it's like at the like Mario Odyssey does the exact same thing. The hard part is not the last thing. When you beat the hard part, then you get to go on this victory lap with the hyper beam and just nuke the Mother Brain T-Rex and nuke every enemy that stands in your path, and it's so satisfying. Like like as somebody who like reviews a lot of video games, most of the time it's generally my opinion that like I'll always finish a game to review it because you really need to, but I've never really have my opinion swayed that much by the ending sequence of a game. But you would be doing yourself such a disservice if you played this game and did not experience the finale sequence. It's that damn good.
It is. The storytelling in Super Metroid is awesome,
good.
And they do it with like no words. It's just awesome, right? At the end of Metroid 2, we're full spoilers on this thing, so if you care about these 30-year-olds narratives, then turn away.
Watch
out.
out.
At the end of Metroid 2, Samus leaves the final Metroid alive, the baby Metroid. She spares it, and then that is the Metroid that's at the center of Super Metroid. That whole plot, the space pirates want it. The opening of Super Metroid, which rules, where you're going down into this lab, and then Ridley's eye just appears in the background, and then he's there in full force. It's so cool, and he kidnaps the baby Metroid, and then you go back to the planet Zebes to find it, and that's kind of what sets you on the adventure. And just the way it comes back into play at the end is just awesome.
And like there's the bodies of all the scientists at the beginning. It felt so mature and like way more than what you could expect out of video games at the time.
Yeah. And Super Metroid, I played this on Wii U Virtual Console like 11, 12 years ago, and I just didn't get it at the time. I think I was just too young to fully wrap my head around everything that game was doing, and not well spoken enough in games and the language of them to fully get it at the time. But revisiting it, it's like, it's just so masterful. Justin, you mentioned the glass pipe, which is the moment, like the Super Metroid moment people like to talk about, where you plant a bomb in this glass pipe and the pipe explodes, and then you're in Meridia, the water area. But what's so cool is that you walk through that pipe like 5 or 6 times, and then as you're exploring a different corner of the world, you see an identical pipe that's shattered. And that's them telling you, hey, you could do that to that other pipe you're always walking through. And it's just so cool what that game does, and how ahead of its time it was for a game that came out 31 years ago.
It's
It's
a
just it's so awesome.
it's a masterful teacher, and that's so
Yeah.
incredible. There are so many skills that are in the game. Some you get from abilities, some you've had since the beginning, and it's so smart about how it teaches you different abilities. Like it's a masterclass.
Chris, what do you think?
I like Super Metroid. No,
No,
Cool. Up next.
I think
No.
I think tone is probably the biggest thing for me.
Mm.
You know, like you guys said, like that opening sequence, um, it really just sets itself, especially coming from the Game Boy. I mean, my God, it just sets
Mhm.
itself apart from those previous two games, and it's one of it's probably one of the least appreciated examples of like this is a leap from a prior generation to the next generation of like how much at the time graphical improvements could really improve just like the
Mhm.
atmosphere of a game.
Mhm.
um you know, now it's like okay, things are a little bit smoother, a little sharper edges, whatever. But back then, like that leap and having that many concurrent screens that could run at a time, like it really just it set it just gave you the whole all these different feels that like you never knew you could have while playing a video game.
Mhm. Yeah, no, the atmosphere is awesome when you first land on the surface and it's raining outside and the music is just eerie. It's so good, and Samus's sprite looks amazing in Super
Oh
Metroid.
yeah.
She is just so cool in that game. And then the soundtrack is just awesome. It's perfect. One of the greatest moments in that game is when you take the elevator down to Brinstar and that
Yeah.
theme kicks in and it's just so good. Yeah, and that's how you know, wow, you're playing an all-timer. Like it's nonstop start to finish, just perfect. And yeah, it was Sakamoto who directed Super Metroid, and now he most recently did Emio the Smiling Man for Nintendo, returning to that other old series. And he produced Metroid Dread. He still had his hands in the series from time to time, but yeah, that's easily the best game he's ever worked on.
Let me ask you this, Logan, and for you, Chris. Have either of you ever used the Crystal Flash ability in that game?
No, I don't know what that is.
Do you even know what that
I
is?
don't think so.
Yeah.
No, I don't
So
We've
think so.
you've talked about this before. I
yeah,
can't remember what it is though.
yeah, and so it's one like so I had owned the game honestly for years. I had rented a million times before then, and like I guess I had never paid enough attention to the like a little track screen when you're not doing anything. But when it cycles through a bunch of scenes and clips from the game, it finishes by showing Samus doing a bunch of different abilities. And there was one that I had never seen before, where like suddenly she goes into like her suit effectively disappears, and she's in this ball of light, and her health all regens, and that's the Crystal Flash ability, and is like it's in the track screen. And I was like, what the f was that?
Uh-huh.
And it's like I had to like look it up how to do it, and it's one of those things where I swear 90% of people who have played Super Metroid don't even know about it. But you have to have power bombs. You have to have 50 energy or less, empty reserve tanks, 10 missiles, 10 super missiles, and 11 power bombs. So you have at least that many. And then you enter the morph ball form. You spend one power bomb. And then you press a button sequence. I forget what it is, but basically it is like a last ditch, like last stand mode where it dumps all that energy back into your health so that you can keep fighting. And it's the sickest animation I think on the
It's
entire
so
Super
cool.
Nintendo. And again, most people don't even know it
Mhm.
exists.
Yeah, if we were on the playground right now and we were 10 years old, I think you'd be lying to me right
Yeah.
now. I,
Yeah.
I think that you made this up. Yeah, that's so cool.
Mhm.
That's super cool. And yeah, that's what I love about it is that Super Metroid just does feel like it's a very video game, but it also does feel like a world you're truly uncovering that
Mhm.
does like actually exist, and you're finding all of its secrets, and it's just masterfully constructed. I'm so in love with it. I want to play it again. I think I'm probably going to do another run after this show just because of how much we've been talking about
Gotta
it.
play
It's
it
just
too.
great. And that was it then. For 8 years, a Metroid game did not come out, and there's a lot of reasons for that, and one of which is Gunpei Yokoi, who produced the original Metroid, who Chris mentioned. We talked about him on our episode 100 of Toadstool Boardroom, which you should check out, where we talk about a bunch of influential figures in Nintendo history. But he left Nintendo and shortly after passed away in a car accident. And so the story goes that Nintendo didn't really want to touch Metroid for a while after that because of his passing, and they didn't like being asked about it because of that. It was a sore subject for a while, and so years went by, and nothing Metroid happened until finally in 2002, two Metroid games came out on the same day. Metroid Fusion on the Game Boy Advance, which Sakamoto returned to direct. It's the last Metroid game ever made internally at Nintendo. Like they were the sole developer on Fusion. It's the last time that's ever happened to this day. They worked on Other M, but with Team Ninja. But it's been 23 years since Nintendo itself made a mainline Metroid game, which is just crazy. And then, of course, Metroid Prime, Retro Studios, their debut effort under that new name as their studio. They were under a different name. They made Turok and a bunch of other stuff. Metroid Prime came out on GameCube, and on the same day, you had the sequel to Super Metroid and Metroid Fusion, which they called Metroid 4, and the first 3D Metroid ever. So let's talk about Fusion first, to stick kind of on the 2D train for a while here. I just played Metroid Fusion all the way through for the first time last month, and it's really, really good, but it's hard to not just directly compare it to Super Metroid, which isn't necessarily fair. But I think at the time, it's just kind of a little bit of a disappointing sequel. But in hindsight, 20 years later, I would love to see 3, 4, 5 more games like Metroid Fusion from Nintendo, because they just kind of stopped making them. It's a really solid game, but there's a lot of dialogue, a lot of go to the navigation room, talk to Adam the computer. He'll put a beacon on your map and tell you exactly where to go next. And it opens up a little bit the further in that you get, and eventually it kind of is more of a Metroid-like experience where you're figuring out where to go. You're shooting missiles on every wall to find the secrets, but a lot of it is, here's your goal, but we're not really going to tell you how to get there, or you need this thing, we're not going to tell you where it is to open the door to get to your goal, but it's still just more of an on-rails Metroid experience, and it does some cool stuff. The boss fights are awesome. Some of the stuff it does with the X-Parasite and the story is really, really cool. But I left it feeling like, yeah, it's multiple steps down from Super Metroid and even Metroid Dread, but it's still really great. Chris, you were nodding your head along. How do you feel about Fusion?
Fusion's like the first 2D Metroid game that I really, really got into. I was probably like 10. When did this come out? 2002? Yeah, I was like 9 when this came out. I remember getting my copy because I collected enough Snapple caps to trade into Snapple for a copy
awesome.
from them. Yeah, it was like something they did. Yeah, I remember thinking like the other Samus was super creepy.
The SAX
that whole game
stalks you.
Right. And just being like I remember being creeped out by it and not knowing why, but also really liking that, because like there is a lot of dialogue and it is pretty handholdy. But I think as like a 9 or 10-year-old when I played it, I thought it was fine. Like at that point, I was used to playing Pokemon Red and Yellow, and like reading on my Game Boy was not an uncommon thing for me. So I was pretty much used to it. Like I was definitely the target audience for that game. To spoil the next game, I loved the fact that you could get the suit in Metroid Prime. I thought that was the coolest thing in the world because I loved the look of that suit.
Yeah, so if you had the Game Boy Advance link cable, you could link up Metroid Fusion on GBA to Metroid Prime on GameCube and unlock the Fusion suit, the blue, kind of very organic looking X suit that Samus starts Metroid Fusion in Metroid Prime, which is super cool and really lame they didn't put that functionality into NSO with GBA, Metroid Fusion, and Prime Remastered. Like it's right there, and they didn't do it.
Yeah,
Jesse,
but I mean,
you ever played Fusion?
A little bit, yeah. And I started it maybe a year and a half ago, and I fell off of it for kind of all the very Justin-y reasons. Yeah, very slow, very dialogue heavy at the beginning, which is frankly not what Metroid is about to me. No. And I will say, like, the handheldiness of it, like not them holding your hand, but like, you know, the scope and look and things of that was a bit of a turnoff for me. So like, I'm gonna revisit it. I do think if I can power through and get through that initial section where it becomes a little bit more what I'm expecting, it'll be worth it. I will say the fact that I haven't finished it is why I still haven't started Dread. So I need to make the time to just power through it. And I'm sure I'll hit the point where it'll click with me and I'll go. But I really can't help but compare it to Super Metroid because of how similar they are, like graphically, and like that's just not a fair comparison for anybody.
Yeah, it's like definitely I see what they're doing. It's on a spaceship, and there's 6 different wings, and they're labeled very clearly with numbers.
You gotta
They're
go talk
trying
to
to
the
make it.
computer every 5 seconds.
Yeah, it's too often. They're trying to make it a bite-sized experience.
Mhm.
They're trying to make it so you can go to wing 1, do a little bit there, and once you're out of it, you can save the game, stop, put it down, so you don't come back and you're lost. But it just loses something, and I think that Dread is awesome, but Super Metroid, why it still stands as my favorite, is I feel like it was just made at a time where games were made differently than they would ever make them now. Games care so much now if you get stuck. Games want you to have hint systems. Nintendo games specifically guide you way more than games used to. And Dread, to its credit, it really doesn't. It doesn't really care if you get lost, and that's a great thing about it. But Super Metroid just does it better. And then Fusion, I was really excited about the SAX. That it's a version of Samus that stalks you, but after playing Dread, the Emmys are just so much better than the SAX, and so some of that one's juice is taken away a little bit because Dread just really improved upon that 20 something years later. So yeah, Fusion, it's fine, but it just stands lower, I think, on the totem pole of 2D Metroids. I'm going to make a call here because we're already starting to run really short on time. We've been talking about these for a while. We're just going to talk about 2D Metroid games for a little while. We'll skip Prime, and we may revisit Prime in a little bit because I do want to talk about Metroid Zero Mission, which is a remake of Metroid 1 that came out on GBA 2 years after Metroid Fusion in 2004. And this remake's just awesome. It's such a solid remake of Metroid 1. I think it really listened to some of the criticism of Fusion. It's still, you kind of get to a Chozo statue and it tells you where to go next with a beacon on your map, but it doesn't talk to you. And I think that was directly because of Metroid Fusion Backlash. And it just makes for a much cleaner, very Metroid experience. Justin, have you played Metroid Zero Mission?
No, like again, you pretty much cross board. You can assume if it came out on handhold, I haven't touched it. And
Okay,
I was
we're
like,
at that point.
I'm old enough that like because I played through Metroid, I didn't particularly feel a need for it. I was like, yeah, I've been there, done that.
Mm-hmm. That's one I recommend you check out on Nintendo Switch Online. It's like 3 or 4 hours to beat. It's not a long game, and it is just, it's a really, really nice bite-sized Metroid game. Chris?
I'm sorry, I didn't know where you were going.
That's all right.
No, I mean it is. It's my favorite way to revisit the first Metroid. I think if you're somebody that like has a love of this franchise and you want to kind of familiarize yourself like with it in its entirety, it is essential to play. Yeah, to what Logan just said, like the way that it does, like it points you in the right direction where it's not frustrating to get around, because like I feel like for some reason it is easier to get frustrated in the GBA Metroid games than it is in the console ones. Probably just because of the size of the screen, and just what you have to work with. They do, like the way they Sherpa you around is probably more welcome in that space, and the fact that you're playing portably. But it just does such a good job of modernizing that experience. Especially like, just when you go back and play NES after the fact, it's like, oh my god, this is the same game. Like, it's just so much more accessible.
Yeah. So I guess earlier when I said Fusion was the last time Nintendo made a Metroid game, I wasn't counting this remake, right? They did make this, but the last original one that they made was Fusion. But Zero Mission might as well be an original game. It is so from the ground up, the bones of Metroid 1, but just completely in the Super and Fusion style, with an entirely new epilogue that they tacked on where you play as Zero Suit Samus through a really terrible stealth section that is the low point of the game and shouldn't really be in there at all. Yeah, that part's not good. I liked what they were going for. There's a bonus boss fight in there now at the end, but yeah, I think it would have been fine if it had ended just where Metroid 1 ended, but cool that they went for it and added something new. And that was it. For 13 years, that was the last 2D Metroid game. The Prime series took over for a long time. Other M happened. 2017, Mercury Steam in Europe makes Metroid Samus Returns. It's announced at E3 for Nintendo 3DS, which a lot of people were very upset with at the time, but I think people were just happy that, hey, Metroid's back. Prime 4 was announced the same day. Surely that would be out in the next 2 to 3 years. Just kidding. It's almost 10 later. We still don't have it. But it was an exciting day for Metroid fans when that came back. But a few months later, when Samus Returns actually came out on 3DS, I think that it kind of it was exciting to have Metroid back at the time, but I don't think people were that hot on the game, Chris.
Yeah, at the time I remember the same people that bought a Switch on day one were the same people that would have bought a Metroid game on day one, and I think we all had the new thing, and we didn't want to play a 3DS game again because we were like, no, like we've moved on to this this brave new world that we have. And I mean, not only that, but I think my problem with Samus Returns always has been the boop. I hate the way that you have to boop enemies in that game constantly, and that I don't know how else to refer to it. I know they give it a term, but it's
the
boop.
counter.
Yeah, whatever that counter is.
Yeah.
Like you boop a guy across the map and then you shoot him, and it's like every enemy that you encounter, you have to do it too, and it is a rhythm of a game that you can certainly play. It is not the rhythm of a Metroid game that I want to play. And for that reason, I do not like that game.
And Mercury's Steam got it much better the second time around with Dread. The counter is still there. You still do it a lot, but it's not the core part of the combat like it was in Samus Returns, where you almost can't even deal damage to some of these things until you counter.
It's also the I think the handheld thing is also not doing it any favors.
Yeah.
Like that game is so claustrophobic. Because everything is just so squished together. They try to render the enemies to like the 3DS's credit, like as best as it can. Like try to add a lot of details to it. But at the same time, like it just limits what you can see. And Dread does a really good job at because you're playing on this big wide screen, like you just have more surface area and you know what's around you, or have a better idea of what's around you. Yeah, I remember being surprised that didn't bother me when I played Dread the first time.
Yeah, I haven't finished Samus Returns, like I mentioned, just because it just doesn't feel quite right. The combat is not great. And then they try to spice up the Metroid boss fights, because you're still hunting down 40 Metroids, but you just do so many of these boss fights so many times, and they're exhausting. The Metroids transform into these really weird things that, I don't know. I just want to fight a Metroid. I don't want to fight this weird dragon thing. Like, I don't know. It's fine. I kind of want Metroid 2 to get another shot someday, because I think that the two versions we have, neither is just really definitive, and I feel like it's kind of the missing piece in this whole saga right now. Dread, I want to talk about, but we're out of time. So, guys, we're gonna have to do a part 2 of this Metroid retrospective.
Yeah,
we have a lot of other games. It's awesome.
We haven't even talked about the timeline yet,
or Other M, or Federation Force,
or Other M,
or Spinball.
Or Prime Pinball, or Hunters,
or Metroid Blast.
Yeah, Blast Ball on 3DS, which is free to play.
I was thinking Metroid Blast from Nintendo Land.
Oh, wow, okay, yeah.
Right.
I guess we could talk about
way.
that. Yeah. So we'll do a part 2 of this at some point when we have a slow week. Who knows? Maybe it'll just be next week. But for now, that is another episode of the Toadstool Boardroom in the books. Weekly Nintendo show here on Thursdays. Apple Podcasts, Spotify with a video version on YouTube. Find us on Blue Sky at Toadstool Boardroom. Send us an email, toadstoolboardroom@gmail.com. Justin, where can people find you?
Find me on Blue Sky, KOREIS, and then all the Blue Sky noise after that. I'm going to have probably a couple weeks out, but I've got a preview coming up that I think will be really cool for fans of things. I'll talk about it more when I get a chance.
Fans of things. I'm a fan of things. Chris, where can
also,
people
I'm
find
going to be
you?
in the Monster Hunter beta all weekend, so CV Hunting Monsters.
I'm out. I'm not playing it. I'm just waiting for launch.
Cool.
I'm holding off. Yeah. Chris, where can people find you?
You can find me at Shrives93 all over the internet. I don't go on X anymore. So if you try to hit me up there, I won't respond. That's it.
You can find me at Logan J. Plant, and please listen to NVC this week, because not only are we talking about the financials for 30 minutes, we're also talking about Donkey Kong Jungle Beat for 30 minutes, and I can't wait.
Yes!
I can't wait to talk about it.
Chris is sold.
Yeah, I finished it.
Oh my god, I'm
weekend.
in.
Dude.
What
oh
a game.
God. What a game. What a phenomenal game
Jungle Beat is.
It's amazing. It's awesome. It's
I have
one of my
a
favorite
Jungle
games
Beat
ever
story for you.
Oh.
I won't tell. I know Justin's got to
Okay.
go, but
Yeah,
I'll tell it to you after
Cool,
the show.
that's a tease ahead. We'll talk about Chris's Jungle Beat story next
Talk
week.
about it on the show.
Yeah.
But for now, that's all the time I got. I got to get back to playing Animal Crossing New Leaf on my Nintendo 3DS. Have a great week. Thanks so much for listening. We'll catch you next time right here in the Toadstool Boardroom.